The day my husband's will was read, one page went missing, and our family turned cold. It's late now. The house is quiet in that way it only gets when the world finally stops asking things of you. I'm sitting at my kitchen table with two sets of papers in front of me, one that we lived by, and one we never heard. The old will is thin and yellowed, the corners curled like dried petals. The letterhead is still raised under my thumb, embossed, official, important. But the page I found last week, it feels different. The paper is smoother. The ink is darker. And when I lifted it from the folder, it carried the faintest trace of his aftershave, trapped for decades like a ghost in a drawer. You don't expect a smell to make you cry at my age, but it did. I need to tell you this because for 20 years, my children carried a version of their father that wasn't fully true. They let a document do what time and sickness and disappointment never could. It hardened them. It separated them. And tonight, before I put these pages back where they belong, I'm going to read you what was on the missing page, what we should have heard that day, what could have saved us from all that ice, and what happened when the truth finally came out. Have you ever watched a family fracture without a sound? No yelling, no slammed doors, just a slow cooling, like soup left on the stove too long until it skins over. That's what happened to us. We were a warm family once. Not perfect, no, not even close, but warm. Sunday dinners. Kids' birthday candles. My husband, Robert, carving roast with his sleeves rolled up, humming off-key because he thought it made the room lighter. Then he got sick fast. Faster than the doctors predicted, faster than I could accept. And when he died, the grief was heavy, but it was still the kind of grief that pulls people together. For a little while. Until the will. The lawyer's office was in a squat brick building that always smelled like wet umbrellas and old carpet. We filed into a narrow waiting room with chairs that squeaked like they were complaining. My daughter Diane sat up straight, like posture could keep her from falling apart. My son Michael sat with his hands folded so tightly the knuckles were pale. And my youngest, Ray. Ray leaned against the wall, jaw working, eyes fixed on a corner of the ceiling like he couldn't bear to look down at what was coming. I remember thinking, just for a second, maybe the reading would settle us. Maybe hearing Robert's final wishes would be like hearing his voice again. Isn't that what we all want from the dead, one last clear sentence? But the room didn't feel like closure. It felt like a test. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, laid the papers down in front of him and tapped them into a neat stack. He wore the kind of tie that looked too expensive for the tiredness in his face. His secretary, a woman with sharp glasses, kept glancing at the clock like she had somewhere else to be. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat. This will was executed on, he said the date, and it sounded like a pin dropping in the silence. He began reading. At first it was the usual language, the sort of wording that doesn't sound like love even when it's meant to protect it. I, Robert James Holden, being of sound mind, and so on. Diane's mouth tightened. Michael stared at the desk. Ray's foot kept bouncing, heel tapping like a slow drum. Then we got to the first real gift. The family home, Mr. Hargrove read, to my daughter, Diane Holden. Diane's breath hitched, half relief, half shock. The home wasn't just a building. It was the place she brought her prom pictures, the place she came back to after her divorce, the place she once swore she'd never leave again. Then Mr. Hargrove continued. All interest in Holden Hardware, Robert's small business, to my daughter, Diane. Michael blinked hard. Ray's tapping stopped. I felt something shift in my stomach, like a bowl tilting off a counter. Because Diane did work with her father, yes. But she wasn't the only one who carried that business when times got hard. Michael fixed the shelves when they bowed. Ray did deliveries in winter storms before he lost his way. Mr. Hargrove read on. To my son, Michael Holden, I leave my personal tools and the sum of $5,000. 5,000. That was it. Not a share of the business, not a piece of the house, just tools and what sounded like a condolence prize. Michael's ears turned red, and I could tell he was trying not to make a face. Michael never wanted to be seen wanting. But in that moment, the wanting was loud anyway. Then Mr. Hargrove reached the line that turned the air to glass. "To my son, Raymond Holden," he said, "I leave $1. There's a special kind of silence that comes after something cruel. It's not quiet. It's frozen." Ray let out a short laugh that didn't carry any humor. $1, he said. That's what he thought of me? Diane didn't look at him. Michael stared harder at the desk. And me. I felt my throat close up, because I knew Robert loved Ray, even if Ray made it difficult. Mr. Hargrove didn't pause long enough for human feelings. He kept reading, voice smooth and distant. There were a few more small items, furniture, a watch, charity. Then he said, "That concludes the will." And something in me, some small, careful part that noticed details, noticed the bottom corner of the last page. Page 2. But I could have sworn when he started, I saw 3 sheets. I could have sworn I heard paper shuffle like there was more. I leaned forward. "Mr. Hargrove," I said softly, "is that all of it?" He smiled like you smile at a child asking why the sky is blue. "Yes, Mrs. Holden. That's the executed copy we have." "What about," I began, and stopped, because I didn't know how to explain a feeling without sounding foolish. "The page numbers." He glanced down, too quickly. "Standard formatting varies," he said. "Sometimes drafts, sometimes attachments. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." But Ray stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. "Don't bother," he said, voice tight. "It's clear." He walked out of that office and didn't look back. And in a way, none of us looked back either. Not right then. We were too stunned, too proud, too wounded. Have you ever seen gratitude die on someone's tongue? I watched it happen to Michael as he tried to say, "Thank you," out of politeness, and the word just wouldn't come. Outside, the day was bright enough to feel insulting. Diane clutched her purse like it was armor. Michael walked slightly behind me like he didn't know where he belonged. And I kept hearing that line, $1, over and over, like a bell you can't unring. That was the moment the warmth left us. It didn't explode. It didn't announce itself. It simply slipped away. The first winter after the will reading, I set the table for Christmas out of habit. I put out 3 sets of plates, 3 cloth napkins, 3 glasses that matched because I wanted the day to look normal even if it couldn't feel normal. Then Diane called. "Mom," she said, I'm exhausted. I'm not up for company." Michael texted, not called. "I'm working," he wrote. No explanation. Ray didn't do either. I ate my Christmas dinner alone at a table set for a family that had decided it wasn't one anymore. The next year, I stopped setting 3 places. That's how it happens. You don't stop loving people, you stop expecting them. Michael and Diane began speaking only about paperwork. Taxes. Deeds. Accounts. Their voices on the phone were polite in the way strangers are polite. When Diane took over the hardware store, she started calling it my responsibility, not Dad's place. A small change of words, but it mattered. Words are where people hide their hearts. Michael stopped dropping by. On the rare occasions he didn't go inside the store. He'd meet me in the parking lot, hand me a bag of groceries like I was a neighbor, and leave. One afternoon I asked him, "Are you angry at Diane?" He stared at the steering wheel. "I'm angry at Dad," he said. "But it's safer to be angry at her." Isn't that a terrible kind of math? The way grief finds the nearest person and makes them pay. Ray, my Ray, became a ghost at the edge of our story. He moved 2 towns over. Changed jobs. Changed phone numbers. At one point he grew a beard so thick I barely recognized him in a photograph someone posted online. Once, I saw him at the grocery store. Just a glimpse, his shoulders, the way he walked like he expected to be blamed for things. I called his name. He paused. He turned halfway. His eyes met mine. Then he looked away, like looking at me hurt too much. At night, I would lay in bed and remember Robert's hands, calloused, steady, warm. And I'd think, how could those hands write a will that cold? I tried to defend him in my head. Maybe he thought Diane needed stability. Maybe he thought Michael could take care of himself. Maybe he thought Ray didn't deserve anything. But in my heart, resentment grew anyway. Quiet and stubborn. Because the will became our final photograph of him. And it was a photograph with half the faces cut out. A missing page can erase a lifetime of love. Years passed in small, sharp moments. A wedding where Diane and Michael stood on opposite sides of the room like magnets flipped the wrong way. A funeral where Ray didn't come at all. A grandchild's graduation where the family photo had empty spaces that nobody explained. And every time someone mentioned Robert, the conversation stiffened. As if his name itself was a legal document. Then, after nearly 15 years of this cold, something happened that cracked it. It was a Tuesday, nothing special. I was at the bank, trying to close out an old account that still had Robert's name on it because paperwork has no sense of mercy. The banker, a young man with careful hair, clicked through his screen and frowned. "Mrs. Holden," he said, "what happened with the cabin trust?" I blinked. "The what?" He pointed at his monitor, then realized he shouldn't. "There's a note here. A trust set up for a property upstate. It references a clause in the will." He hesitated. "Clause 4, page 3. Page 3. My stomach did that tilt again. "There wasn't a page 3, I said, and heard how strange it sounded out loud. The banker's face changed. Not accusation, just confusion. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's what the file says. It might be an old note. An old note. Or a forgotten truth." I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, as if the road might try to slip away. In my mind I could hear Mr. Hargrove's voice, "Nothing to worry about." But now I was worried. What if we never heard the whole will? What if my children froze each other out over something unfinished, something incomplete? And the darker question, one I didn't want to ask myself, was this: if there was a missing page, who benefited from it being gone? That night, I pulled out the estate box I'd shoved into the back of my closet years ago. The cardboard was soft at the corners from being moved and ignored. I set it on the bed like it might bite. Inside were folders labeled in Diane's tidy handwriting: deed, probate, taxes. Diane had organized everything right after the funeral because she's the kind of person who tries to outrun pain by making lists. I found the copy of the will we'd heard. 2 pages. Page 1. Page 2. I ran my finger along the bottom edge where a staple mark sat like a scar. Then I noticed something I'd never allowed myself to notice. On page 2, the last paragraph ended with a sentence that didn't feel complete. It read, "It is my intention that the distribution herein reflects," and then it jumped to the next line like the thought had been cut off and stitched back clumsily. "Reflects what, Robert?" My hand started to shake. Not dramatic shaking, just enough to make the paper whisper. I wanted to call Diane right then. I wanted to call Michael. I wanted to drag Ray back by the collar and say, "Wait. Don't you walk out yet." But I didn't. Because what if I was wrong? What if I stirred up 20 years of pain for nothing but a banker's mistake and an old woman's imagination? Still, I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I called Mr. Hargrove's office. His secretary didn't recognize my name at first. Then she did, and her voice cooled a degree. "Mr. Hargrove retired," she said. "We transferred files to storage." "Could there have been an attachment?" I asked. "A third page?" She paused, just long enough to be a pause you remember. "I don't know," she said. "Those things happen. Those things happen. Like families breaking. Like years disappearing." When I hung up, my reflection in the dark phone screen looked older than I felt. And in that moment, I made a decision that scared me. I was going to look for the missing page. I started where memories live: closets, drawers, old books. I went through Robert's things gently, like I might wake him if I moved too fast. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, one that had always stuck, and found receipts, spare keys, a flattened piece of candy from a grandchild's Halloween bucket. Nothing else. I checked the file cabinet, the recipe tin, the shoebox of photographs. Days turned into weeks. Then, on a rainy afternoon, I pulled a cookbook off the shelf, one Robert had given me early in our marriage. The spine was cracked. Flour dust fell from the top like a sigh. Inside the cover was an envelope taped flat, hidden like someone expected it to be overlooked. My heart thudded so hard I had to sit down. The envelope was yellowed, sealed, and on the front, in Robert's handwriting, it said, "Read this with them." With them. Not alone. I stared at it a long time. Isn't it strange how a few words on paper can feel heavier than a whole house? My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice, and behind it, another page, the same letterhead as the will. At the bottom corner, page 3. I didn't cry right away. I went numb first, like my body was trying to protect me from the impact. Then I saw his signature, bold and unmistakable, and the numbness cracked. Because it was real. It existed. We had missed it. I read it alone anyway. I know he wrote with them. I know. But I needed to know what kind of bomb I was holding before I carried it into my children's hands. The page wasn't written like a cold legal instrument. It still had legal structure, yes, but threaded through it were plain sentences Robert must have insisted on adding. The kind lawyers tolerate because a dying man's voice should be allowed somewhere. And as I read, my breath kept catching, because the meaning of everything changed. Here's what we should have heard that day, what Mr. Hargrove never read. First, the house. Robert wrote that the home was not meant to belong to Diane alone. Diane was to live there temporarily, yes, so she could keep her footing after the divorce, but the home was to be sold within 2 years. And when it's sold, the proceeds were to be divided equally between all 3 children. Equally. I covered my mouth with my hands so the sound I made wouldn't scare me. Second, the hardware store. Diane was to serve as executor and manage the store until it could be appraised properly. Not own it outright. Not claim it as proof she was the chosen one. The store's value, after debts, was to be split 3 ways as well. Third, Michael. Robert had left Michael his tools, yes, but the missing page explained why. It said the tools were meant as something steady, something personal, because Michael builds what others overlook. Wouldn't that have softened him? Wouldn't that have told him his father saw him? Fourth, Ray. This was the part that made my chest ache like an old bruise pressed too hard. Robert wrote that Ray's $1 was never meant to be his inheritance. It was meant as a legal signal, proving he hadn't been forgotten, protecting the will from being contested by anyone who might claim Ray was accidentally omitted. And then, Robert left Ray the cabin property upstate through the trust the banker mentioned. A small place near the lake, nothing fancy, but solid. Paid for. A refuge. And Robert wrote, in plain words, Ray needs somewhere to start over where he is not watched. I had to stop reading. I had to press my palm to the table because the room felt like it was moving. All those years we thought Robert had written Ray off as worthless, and here he was, trying to leave him dignity. Then came the last part. Not property. Not money. A letter, meant to be read out loud. Robert wrote that he'd tried to be fair, but fairness isn't always obvious when you're looking at it through fresh grief. He explained that Diane had received help over the years, college paid in full, a down payment after her divorce, that Michael and Ray hadn't asked for and hadn't received. The will was supposed to balance those scales without humiliating anyone by listing every past favor like debts. He wrote, I love you in different ways because you are different people. And then, a line that made me sob in a way I hadn't sobbed since the funeral. Please don't let my money become your reason to hate. He asked them, begged them, to meet once a year, even if it was awkward, even if it was short, even if it was only coffee. He asked them to talk about anything except the estate, at least for the first hour. He wrote a message for each of them without naming them as good or bad. To Diane, that responsibility is not the same as love, and she shouldn't confuse the two. To Michael, that being quiet doesn't mean being unseen. To Ray, that he wasn't beyond saving, and that Robert was sorry for the ways he'd failed to show up. I sat at my kitchen table with that missing page trembling in my hands and realized something I almost couldn't bear. We had been living with the wrong ending. And now I had to decide what to do with the right one. I didn't call them one by one. I knew that would turn into 3 separate storms, 3 separate versions of the truth. So I asked them all to come to my house the following Sunday. Diane arrived first, brisk as ever, holding a pie like it was a peace offering. She looked around my living room and said, "This feels serious." Michael came next. He didn't hug me at first. Then he did, sudden and tight, as if he'd been saving it up. Ray came last. I didn't expect him to show at all. When I saw his truck out front, my knees nearly gave out. He stepped inside and stood near the doorway like a man prepared to leave quickly. His hair had gray in it now. So did mine. 20 years, right there in the mirror of each other's faces. Have you ever wanted to rewind time so badly it makes you angry? I did. I wanted to grab them all by their sleeves and drag them back to that lawyer's office and make everyone sit down again. But I couldn't. I only had this Sunday. I set the papers on the coffee table between us. The old 2-page copy. And the loose page 3. Diane's eyes went straight to the letterhead. Michael leaned forward. Ray didn't move, but his jaw clenched. "I found something," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. A page that never got read. Diane let out a sharp breath. "That's not possible," she said too quickly. Michael's eyes narrowed. "Unless it is," he said. Ray finally spoke. "If this is some trick," he said, "don't. Just listen," I told him. "Just listen once. And then I read it. Out loud. The house clause. The store clause. The trust. The letter." As the words filled the room, I watched their faces change in ways that made my heart ache. Michael's expression broke first. Not anger, grief. The kind that makes a person look younger for a moment, like a child hearing he mattered after all. Ray's eyes went glossy, but he blinked it back hard. He stared at the carpet like it had done something to him. Diane sat very still. Too still. Her hands folded, unfolded, folded again. And when I finished, she didn't say, "I'm sorry." She said, "Where did you find that?" "In a cookbook," I answered. "Taped inside. Robert wanted it read with you." Diane swallowed. "Mom," she began, and stopped. Ray's voice went low. "So we wasted our lives over a missing page." Michael looked at Diane. "You managed the paperwork," he said carefully. "You had the files. Did you know?" The room held its breath. Diane's eyes filled, but her chin lifted the way it always did when she felt cornered. "I saw it once," she admitted. "A long time ago. In the estate folder. It wasn't attached. I thought it was a draft." "A draft," Ray repeated, like the word tasted bitter. "And Diane's voice shook. "I was angry too. I was angry at Ray for the things he did, and I was angry at Dad for putting me in charge of everything. I didn't want to reopen it. I thought it was too late. Too late." Michael stood up, slow, like his body needed time to decide what to do. "It wasn't too late," he said. "It was just inconvenient." Ray let out a sound, half laugh, half choke. "So you kept the cold," he said to Diane. "Because it served you." Diane flinched like he'd slapped her. That's not fair, she said. I didn't. Fair, Ray cut in, and the word was sharp enough to cut. You don't get to use that word. I held up my hand, not because I could stop them, but because mothers never stop trying. Your father wrote this so you wouldn't do this, I whispered. So please. But the truth doesn't always warm people. Sometimes it burns first. Ray picked up the missing page, looked at his father's signature, and for a second his face softened in a way that broke me. Then he set it down carefully, like it was fragile. I don't know what to do with this, he said. It doesn't give me back my 20s. Or my 30s. Michael sank back into his chair, rubbing his forehead. All those holidays, he murmured. All that silence. Diane finally cried then, not pretty crying, not performative. Just grief leaking out of the cracks she'd kept sealed. I thought I was protecting myself, she said. And I was punishing you. Ray turned toward the door. I can't fix this today, he said. Maybe not ever. He left. No slam. Just the click of the latch. And in that quiet, Michael said something that still rings in my ears. We let paper decide what love meant. After that Sunday, nothing magically healed. Real life isn't a movie, honey. Truth doesn't come with a ribbon. It comes with wreckage you have to clean up. Michael and Diane didn't speak for months. Then one day, Michael showed up at the store early, before opening, and Diane let him in. They didn't hug. They didn't apologize right away. They just stood among the shelves and breathed the same dusty air their father used to breathe. That was their first thaw. Ray didn't come back for a long time. He wouldn't answer Diane's calls. He answered mine sometimes, but only to say he was fine. Fine is a word people use when they don't want to be asked again. Then, one spring, I got a photograph in the mail. No note. Just a picture. It was the cabin by the lake, the one Robert meant for Ray. The porch had been repaired. A new swing hung from the beam. The grass was cut. On the back, in Ray's handwriting, it said, I'm here. I'm trying. I pressed that photograph to my chest like it was a heartbeat. And Diane. Diane did something I didn't expect. She went back through the estate records with a new kind of honesty, like she was finally willing to look at the ugly parts of herself. She met with an attorney, not Mr. Hargrove, he was long gone from the work, and she set aside money to make things as right as they could be made. Not because she had to. Because she finally understood she'd been living in a warmed house with a cold heart. Did it fix everything? No. Some words don't unsay. Some years don't return. But last Thanksgiving, 20 years after the will reading, Ray came to my house. He stood in my doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes wary. Diane was in the kitchen. Michael was setting plates. Ray cleared his throat. I'm not staying long, he said. Diane stepped out, wiped her hands on a towel, and nodded. Okay, she said. Thank you for coming. Just that. No speech. No courtroom. No demand that he forgive her on schedule. Ray looked surprised, like he'd braced for a fight and found a chair instead. They ate at the same table. Not close, not cozy, yet, but present. And when Michael passed Ray the potatoes, their fingers touched for half a second, and neither of them pulled away like it burned. That half second mattered more than any inheritance ever could. So here I am, back at this table, with both versions of Robert's will. The one that broke us, and the one that might have held us together. I've learned something I wish I didn't have to learn. Money doesn't just divide property. It divides memories. It makes people rewrite a whole lifetime into a single verdict: loved, not loved, chosen, discarded. But a person is never just their last document. Robert was more than a will. He was bedtime stories. He was scraped knees. He was hands on shoulders at graduations. He was a man who tried, and failed sometimes, and tried again. If you're listening and you have family you haven't called, ask yourself something for me. If a single page went missing, would you want your whole story judged by what remained? Because that's what we did to Robert. And to each other. Tonight, I'm slipping page 3 back where it belongs. I'm stapling it carefully, not because staples can fix a family, but because the record should be whole. And I'm putting it in a folder with his name and one word written across the front, whole. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think of your own family, your own silences, please tap like. It helps more people find these quiet, human stories here on Dust of Old Days. And if you want more grandmother-style storytelling, old family secrets, inheritance heartbreaks, and the kind of truths that arrive late but still matter, subscribe to Dust of Old Days. Because as long as I'm here to tell it, I want the missing pages found. And honey, I don't want you to stay cold.